Alright, let's talk about the Rings of Power. This isn't going to be like a normal review, but I'm just going to talk about the first 3 episodes that we've seen so far and then some of the controversy that's gone along with it. Now, the Rings of Power is based on The Lord of the Rings and its appendices, written by J.R.R. Tolkien, and it's set about 1,000 years before The Hobbit and the Lord of the Rings story. I'm not a mega fan of Lord of the Rings. I've watched the Lord of the Rings trilogy and the Hobbit trilogy 2-3 times maybe, and I definitely prefer The Hobbit, but I never really got that into the lore or the backstory. I never really wanted to delve deeper into it. It just didn't captivate me as much as other things have. And I wasn't exactly hyped for this show, but I thought it'd be interesting. But then when you see the initial reviews that came out, I was kind of skeptical about the show, but I wanted to watch it. I wanted to give it a try, see what's going on with it. Long story short, I think this show is pretty mid. Most characters are frankly very bland, the writing is stale, and the delivery is pretty wooden, whilst tonally it's a bit of a mess when jumping between different characters, because it can feel disjointed. The plotline is based around Middle-earth being peaceful and free of war, but then strange things start occurring, along with the return of orcs as the infamous Sauron is thought to be alive, and Galadriel is hell-bent on finding him and destroying him, and that's kind of your premise here. People think this world is free of evil, but it's not. Now, the premise is obviously decent because J.R.R. Tolkien wrote it, so it's going to be decent because the Lord of the Rings and Hobbit story are interesting, but the execution is far from it. And my main issue is just this show is not that fun, whereas the Lord of the Rings and the Hobbit are very fun. Whilst they have their serious side and their emotional moments, whatever, it's fun. This, not so much. There are several characters we're jumping between, and that's fine, that's not a problem, because we've seen in several other shows, like Game of Thrones or The Wire, that's fine, that can be a good recipe, for a story that's interesting, but here, it all just feels a little bit disconnected. It doesn't always feel like all these characters are really in the same sort of situation. Of course they're not, they're all going through different things, but it just doesn't feel that connected. And it also doesn't help that the characters aren't that interesting. There are younger versions of famous elves that we've seen in the other films, like Galadriel and Elrond, and Elrond is charismatic enough, he's a bit of, something to him, but Galadriel is just not interesting at all here. She arguably has the most boring screen time here, alongside the hobbits. It's just, whenever it cuts to her, I'm kind of like, here we go. She doesn't really speak naturally here. Everything she says is like she's trying too hard. A simple line about a new place they've walked into, and she's saying it with this stern face and this really slow head turn, and it's just kind of like, do you have any other emotion apart from this, or are you just constantly in a super serious mood? The character I'd say I enjoy the most here is this elf called Arondir. He's not the most exciting character I've ever witnessed, but it seems like he has a grounded character. He doesn't say much, but he's focused on his job. And his story is the most interesting because he's kind of like playing detective here. He knows things are, something's going on. So he kind of, goes investigating and exploring, and then that brings him to the orcs, which is when it gets interesting. He's someone I say I root for, out of all the characters in this show, and I look forward to his scenes the most because I feel like something exciting or something that's going to move the plot forward is going to happen there. And it's just all the scenes with orcs are cool as well, because orcs are just, they're just cool. But when I know there's going to be a scene with Galadriel or the really Irish hobbits, I'm just kind of, not that being Irish is a problem, but scenes with Galadriel and the hobbits, I don't look forward to one bit. Honestly, when they come along, I'm just like, oh, fuck's sake. And then the scenes end up being 20 minutes long with them, and I'm just thinking, can we go back to the cool elf? It just doesn't feel like they're really adding much to the show. It feels like they're just taking up screen time that could be, better spent elsewhere. And whilst the sets and the costumes and everything is impressive, as you'd expect for the world's most expensive show ever, the world does not feel very immersive half the time. It feels like, honestly, I am just watching a set, because I'm just not pulled in, I'm not convinced. That's sort of emphasized more when characters feel like they're reading sort of just off a screen behind them or something. It doesn't feel very genuine. It doesn't feel like the characters believe what they're saying some of the time. And it's just hard to get absorbed into the world. The elf that I find interesting, Arondir, he has a skin fade. And it's just is that really a thing? In this world, they've got barbers. It just, it kind of pulls you out when you see something like that. But yeah, I'd say the first 2 episodes weren't good at all. That was a real chore to sit through, especially as each episode is an hour long. So it's 2 hours worth of just kind of boring, not very interesting content. But episode 3 that kind of just came out, that was pretty decent. You know, not amazing. You know, it's not great, but it's better. It's certainly an improvement on the first 2, but it still has problems. There's also a bit of controversy with this show as well. You know, I read the other day that Amazon were actually taking down reviews. You know, they saw people leaving a lot of negative reviews, and they said that they thought a lot of these people were trolls. Now, that doesn't really make much sense, does it? You know, why would be, you know, leaving a negative review on a show that is pretty mediocre? In fact, it's very mediocre so far. I think it's got a lot of work to do to become a good show. But yeah, why would that be an issue? Well, that's because Amazon think it is linked to racism. Yes, of course. A few people have noted that there's a lot more diversity in this show compared to, well, The Lord of the Rings and the Hobbit trilogy, especially. That is true, and it's a case of they've more than likely done this to tick a diverse box rather than anything else. It's one of them. I personally don't give a shit who's black or who's white or who's anything in this show, as long as the character is interesting. But I think the fact that Amazon are using this as a reason to remove reviews because they think everyone leaving a negative review is a racist, that's not true. They're leaving negative reviews because your show just ain't that good. They say they're trying to weed out the trolls and, you know, therefore they're selecting which reviews they want to be published. I mean, that's basically just controlling the ratings. Right now, every episode for IMDb reviews has like a 7 or 7.5. That's definitely bullshit, okay? They've definitely removed loads of reviews there because there's no way that's a 7. Any of the first couple episodes are a 7. They're like 5s or 6s, you know. So it's clear they're trying to boost their rating because, you know, people have kicked off and said, your show's just not all that good. And considering it's the world's most expensive show ever, you would expect some better quality here. The show is not poor because there's non-white people in it. The show is poor because the writing is bland, the performances are mostly bland, and the execution of this so far is bland. In comparison to House of the Dragon, these two shows are leagues apart right now. You know, House of the Dragon, or the Game of Thrones universe, whatever you want to call it, is just way more interesting because it's like gritty and brutal and fucked up, whereas this world, you know, the Lord of the Rings, Power of the Rings world, universe, it feels kind of safe. Feels like predictable as well. It feels like you can guess what's going to happen in a lot of scenes, and it just doesn't feel that wild. I'll give credit where credit's due. Episode 3 certainly stepped things up a bit. You know, there was some deaths, there was some, you know, cool scenes, and you know, it got better. It improved. I just hope the stakes are raised in this show in time, given time. I hope it can step up and give the characters more than 2 emotions, and, you know, actually connect the plots a bit more and just have some fun. I wouldn't write this show off just yet, and I think if you are a fan of The Lord of the Rings or The Hobbit, I'd give it a go. See if you like it. I think you'd enjoy episode 3. You know, I enjoyed half of it because you still had scenes with Galadriel and the Hobbits, but the other half was decent. If I had to score it so far, I think I'd give it 6 out of 10. You know, I'd say the most recent episode was maybe like a 7, and the 2 before were like 5, 6, so it's alright. If you've seen it, let me know what you think about it, and I'll see you in the next episode, video, whatever. Bye-bye.